你好，大家好，我叫 Emmanuel Daniel，我的中文名字是伊利，我是亚洲银行家和财富与社会的主席。让我先祝辛苦财富10周年生日快乐！谢谢你们邀请我给今天的演讲。So let me speak in English. I've entitled my speech as The Three Phases of Wealth. I borrowed the idea from an old American movie called The Three Phases of Eve. I think it was in 1957, and it featured a very famous actress at that time, Joanne Woodward, who had three different personalities. Wealth has different ways to look at it. You can look at it from the perspective of the asset itself. That's one phase. You can look at it from the perspective of the role that wealth plays in society. That's another phase. And you can look at wealth from the perspective of you, the user of wealth. And I want to talk to you about wealth from each of these different phases that it has. Let's start by thinking about wealth as an asset class. If I ask every one of you listening to this speech to write down what your assets are, what would you write? Would you say how much money you have? Would you say how many cars you own? How many houses you have? How many properties you own around the world? What would be the first few items in your list of wealth that you own? Can I suggest that the first item that you have in your list is your family and your friends and the people who are important to you, the people who will stay with you till the day you die, who are with you in good times and bad? That classification alone makes all of us wealthier than we think we are, and some of us poorer than we think we are. The second most important asset in wealth is your health. And all of us know this, that without health, that there is so much that we cannot enjoy and that we can take for granted in our life, in our everyday life. And then comes all of the other assets that we now think of wealth. Money, gold, investment, and so on. Something very interesting happened to these assets over time. There was a time when gold was very important. In fact, when you visit the hutongs of Beijing, I still meet people who tell me stories of hiding gold bars under the sand in their hutongs. That was their preservation of the wealth that they owned, and they were very afraid of these gold bars being stolen. But over time, today, of course, cash and bank accounts are important alternatives to gold bars. But gold also performed another function. It was a hedge, an economic hedge against inflation, against exchange rate risks, and so on. Guess what happened in the last 2 years? Gold has been losing that role that it played in the economy as a hedge against inflation to new forms of digital assets that are beginning to perform like gold, like digital assets, like cryptocurrencies, and so on. And you can see this in this chart that I've put out, which is that the cryptocurrencies have been playing the role of gold. In other words, new forms of digital assets are playing an important role in the economy today. And the most interesting of these digital assets is this picture that I'm putting out for you to see. This is a digital photograph or a digital picture that was put together by an artist in the US called Beeple. And it was bought by an investor in Singapore whose only wealth was digital assets for $69 million. This is the highest ever, or rather up to this point, the highest ever money ever paid or value ever paid for a digital asset that does not even actually exist, except that it is digitally confirmed as being owned by one person or another, an NFT, a non-fungible asset. And this is a new digital class that's creating new forms of asset class that didn't exist before. And the person who bought this particular digital painting, guess what? He says he's going to put it in a digital building. Not a physical building, but a building that exists only on the internet. And that other people who value this whole idea of a digital existence will come and visit and see this particular art piece. So that's how much the world that we live in has been changing and is continuing to change. There are things that we do not understand today that are shaping the world that we live in. And increasingly, because of digital assets and NFTs, anyone can issue an NFT or a digital asset. It all depends on the perception of others and not on the price of a physical asset as hard as gold anymore. So when a private banker says to you that you should have a range of assets, you start with your family, with your health, with your cash, with your gold, and then you need to start thinking about all of these new asset classes that are coming into existence today. I'm sharing this with you not because I'm trying to interest you in digital assets. I'm just saying to you that this is how much the world has changed. Another asset class that is becoming popular and perhaps even important today is the trading of carbon or carbon assets. Carbon is actually measured in metric tons, and the companies, the people, the non-government institutions that have activities that are carbon positive or carbon negative, and therefore the asset value is positive, are able to trade carbon against businesses and companies that generate carbon into the atmosphere, into the environment. China has just started its own emissions trading platform. At the moment, it only involves the 2,000 or so electric companies in the country. But over time, the ability to be carbon negative is itself becoming an asset that you may want to think about and invest in the future. So what about this boat? If you saw a picture of this in a magazine, you'd probably say, hey, that's an asset that I can own. You know, a boat gives you, or a luxury boat gives you the idea that someone is wealthy. But that's not necessarily an asset. So for all of the new asset classes that are being created, there are two very important considerations. Firstly, it needs to have a value that will not diminish over time. My friends who own boats tell me that there are two happiest days in the life of a boat owner. The day that you buy the boat and the day that you sell the boat. Because looking after a boat is not easy, not cheap. And on the day that you sell a boat, you don't even know whether there's a buyer out there. So that's the second important consideration or definition of a good asset, is that it has to be liquid, meaning that you can sell it when you want to. A boat is an excellent opportunity to enjoy your wealth and to enjoy the hard work that you've put into building your business or your family, but it is not necessarily in itself an asset. It's an expense, but an enjoyable one. Now, let's think about the second phase of wealth. The second phase of wealth is wealth in society. The role of wealth in society. I've studied Chinese culture as deeply as I possibly can, and I'm happy to see that relationship between the wealthy and the rulers of the state was always a deep and interesting and intriguing one that results in its good times a very sustainable and stable community. There are two family houses, the Wang Jia and the Qiao Jia, in Shanxi province, which still exist today. Huge courtyards that are the size of a town, run by families that started very humble and built very normal businesses like tofu or production of goods and services, and became very important part of their community. So that relationship between the wealthy and the needs of the community and the state is a very important role that wealth plays in society. Now, why do I bring this up? Because what happened in the US was that in 1995, and I still remember this because in that period, we used to think very highly of corporate leaders like Jack Welch and others who made a deal with the unions in the US at that time and said, if you are not going to keep wages low, we are going to take our companies and go abroad where the wages are lower and keep our costs down and our profits high. And that's how companies like GE and others went to India, went to China, and did production there in order to be profitable. And what happened over a 20-year period is that the US built an amazing capital culture, capital markets culture, where companies and corporations and their leaders are very well rewarded for keeping their costs down and their profits high. But it caused incredible disaster in the local communities where wages were kept low, inflation just kept going up, and the cost of living went up, and the local community was not able to cope. And then other societies started to take on the roles that used to be done in those local communities. So that is why the wealthy owe an obligation to society. What purpose is there to be wealthy if the society that you belong to isn't equally wealthy? And when I think of some of the initiatives being put together by the Chinese government right now, it is an important process by which you keep the stability of society together so that all of us can enjoy the fruits of being wealthy together. There is a French university professor who wrote a very important book called Capital in the 21st Century. And that book is influencing a lot of economists to try and understand how we can balance the importance of a free capital market that rewards hard work, productivity, low cost, and profitability against the need of ordinary people to live, to grow, to be educated, to have good health care, and to raise families that are promising for the next generation. So these are some of the thinking that is going into the face of wealth in today's society right now, and that we need to take into consideration when we think about our own roles with our own families as well as to the society at large. Now, let me talk to you about the third phase of wealth, and that's you. What's wealth to you? How do you manage wealth? We used to think of wealth as being captured in large banks and financial institutions with huge pillars, which gives us a sense of safety and security. And just think about this. Wealth today is in your hand, it's in your mobile phone, it's in your device. You are able to manage in your own hand what large institutions used to do for only the wealthy before. So wealth has democratized all of us. All of us have access to wealth. All of us have the opportunity to build wealth on devices and on the technology that we carry. For this reason, the people who are in the wealth industry, the private bankers, the people at XinHu Trust who provide these services to you, they need to imagine wealth as being part of our lifestyle. Sometimes when I talk to wealth managers, they give me the sense that the idea of wealth is to get lots of people into a room and then make a presentation to them like the one I'm doing right now, and then try and sell them a product. No! The idea of wealth is that all of us feel energized, that we are able to do what we want to do with our lives, to go out to learn yoga, to take the family out on a holiday, to push ourselves to realize our full potential as individuals. That is the real purpose of wealth. And wealth products have to be designed to capture that energy, that freedom, that aspiration and the values that each of us have. There are many things that are important to us as individuals today that were not important in the past. It can be our values for ensuring that we live in an environment that is sustainable, that we live in communities that are sustainable, things that are important to us personally, to our friends and our family. And what's most important and most interesting is that increasingly there are those of us who don't even live in the real world. There are those of us who are beginning to live in virtual communities and interacting with people around the world, not just in China, in these virtual communities that we design. So, these are the three phases of wealth: the assets that you have, the society that you belong to, and you as an individual. I hope that you've appreciated the points that I've raised in this presentation and that it will give you time to think about the things that are important to you.